Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Saunders. I'm General Secretary of UAIS at University of Alberta, and this video will be the first of two activities that we will be doing in this workshop. So go ahead and open up whatever code editor you'd like to use. I like using VS Code. You can use Atom, you can use Vim. It doesn't matter as long as you have access to the environment. Now, I'm currently working in the Python environment workshop directory, which is the folder you will have to download from our GitHub. This contains all of the necessary files that we'll be using. Specifically for this activity, we'll be using two. They are activity1 and plots.py. We will also technically be using this CSV, SBUX stocks, but you don't really need to even know it's there. We're just going to be using it to actually get the data. Now, finance is a very, very fantastic field of data science. I love doing stuff with stocks. There's tons of manipulations you can do and conclusions you can draw, but you don't need to know much about finance in order to do this workshop. And in fact, I don't know much about finance, but I love working with stocks. Stocks just provide a very good time series graph, and that can be very easily manipulated in order to make it look prettier. To start, we're just going to go through how the data is read and how the data is cleaned, because that's the very first thing you should do whenever you're working with data. So after we import our three libraries, which is pandas, datetime, and plots, we run our main function. Now, just a quick explanation what each of these are. Pandas you could think of as essentially a library built to work with Excel files, but in pandas they're called data frames and they're specifically designed to work with Python. And so for here, when I'm creating stocks, you can think of stocks just like an Excel sheet, but it's been designed so that we can manipulate it with Python commands. Datetime is just a library to handle dates, and it makes it really easy to compare dates and see whether one date came before or last, because otherwise you'd be doing it with strings, which can be quite challenging. And then finally, plots is a custom-built library that I made, here contained in plots.py. And all plots is just contains two different plotting functions that we can use to manipulate our data and compare the before and after. So the very first thing we do after calling our main function is we create a plot object. This essentially just allows us to call the different plots, and then ultimately we just read in our data. So this is how you read in data using pandas. You just call read CSV. It needs to be in the current library you're working on, although if it was a nested folder, like if it was in our current, I would do /folder /folder/sbux. This would be if I had a folder inside of a folder and that's where that was located. But in the current directory, you could see that sbux stocks is in the same level as their activity1, and so we just need to call it like this. All this is doing is just reversing it so that when we read the graph from left to right, it's in an increasing order dates. If we did not have this, it would be decreasing. Then we just rename the columns because we have spaces at the front, and that's not very nice to deal with. Then we just format the columns. And so if you took a look at the data, what you'd see is that all of the prices have a dollar sign or have a dollar sign symbol in front of them, which means that they're a string. We don't want that. We need it to be integer or decimal because that's how we can plot it. And so all this does is it just applies a lambda function to the entire column and converts it into a float, slicing it past the dollar sign. And then here, we're just converting the date into a datetime object so it can be easily compared with each other. Then we just do a basic plot. This will just be the initial plot that we'll use to compare. And so, without further ado, let's run Python activity 1.py. Now, VS Code has its integrated terminal, which is what I'm using right now. All you need to do in order to run this, though, is just open up whatever C command prompt you like, navigate to the current directory that's contained in, which is this Python environment workshop, and then run Python and the name of the file. And so you'll find that one pops up. It'll probably take a little bit of time to load, just because we're dealing with a good amount of data here. But once it ultimately does load, you'll see that the plot we have doesn't really look that good. And so here you can see there's no context. You don't know what this graph is plotting. There's no labels, and I don't really know what this is. What this actually is, though, is it's plotting every single date for every single piece. And this is over 4 years of data. And so this is essentially what it looks like when every single date is concatenated together. You just get this block of black ink, basically. So getting rid of that, we leave our program. And so now let's try and improve our plot. Going over to plots.py, you can see that this is all we're doing initially. We were just getting the x value, the y value, the data frame, and then we're just plotting it and we're showing it. The very first thing that we should do is we should just, instead of doing the simple plt.plot, you should make a fig or a figure object and then add a subplot. Because what this allows you to do is interact with the plot as an object instead of just calling it initially and not being able to do anything to it. So once we do that, we go back here, get rid of basic plot, turn on cool plot, because this essentially makes sure it calls the right function, save both files, and then that's all good. So we run Python activity1.py once again. Again, it'll probably take a little bit of time to load just because of what it's doing. Actually, you'll see that the reason this is taking so long is because it has to plot every single data point and the number that it corresponds to. And so you can see here, right, you still have this big block of text. Essentially nothing changed, but the big difference now is that instead of calling it with just plt plot, we've created a figure object. And so now we can manipulate this figure and do things to it that we otherwise would not have been able to do. Canceling that. So the very first thing that we should probably do is create some labels, because if you don't know what you're looking at, it's very, very hard to interpret the graph well. Almost impossible, I would say. So let's add some labels. And actually, while we're here, because I don't want to wait that long, we can turn off this comment as well. And essentially what this does is it just sets the x ticks at a specific interval. So what we're doing now is we're essentially saying we want about 4 or 5 different steps, and at each of those steps put an instance or put a date. And this will prevent it from being super clogged up, and it should be a lot easier to read. So actually, I'm going to cancel that because I did not save. But if I run this again, we have a syntax error because I don't know what that equal sign is doing. Run the file. And you can see, not only did it pop up a lot quicker, but now we have a title, our axes are labeled, and our dates are very much, or they're quite a lot nicer. We don't have a huge block of text at the bottom that you can't even read. You can see it starts January 28th, 2016, and goes until February 28th, 2020. It's a span of 4 years. If we had not done this, you would have had no idea what the dates were, or even that they were dates at all, because there was no context provided. Quitting out of that, we are almost done this first activity. What we're just going to do now is we are just going to set the ticks, so make sure that it's looking nice. And then here's the big thing. I always do this when I'm plotting graphs, but essentially, if you imagine the graph as a box, we remove the lines on the right and we remove the line on the top. And so you can see it when you save, this actually makes the graph look a lot nicer. So earlier we had a line here and we had a line here, but now they're gone. And so now instead of the graph just being contained almost in a box, it almost looks like it should be a time series graph because there's no end. There's no cutoff point. It just looks like it keeps going. So just to finally wrap up, I will run the basic plot. And remember, this will actually take a little while to run. And then I'll make a new terminal. And from here, I will clear that. And then we'll run Python activity1.py from, oh shoot. That was my bad. I completely forgot to change this. Change that over. Run Python activity1.py. And you should see that we'll have another file pop up. this one. So you can see that it really did pop up a lot quicker. But here is our old graph, and here is our new graph. So you can see just by changing, or just by adding 10 or so lines of Python code, we've made it from a graph that you have no idea what's going on. It looks like it's glitching out, and in fact, you're doing something wrong, to a graph not only where the context is provided, but it is very easy to tell what's going on. You have a title, you can immediately see a good range of dates, and everything is labeled. So that is the first of two activities. What I implore you to do before moving on to the second activity is go in here, try changing some of these. So maybe change this to a 10, maybe look up xsticks and actually figure out what these functions or what these methods are actually doing. And in fact, if there's something you want to do to the graph, I implore you to actually try and do it. So maybe you think, well, let's try changing the color. Instead of it blue, maybe we should make it black, or maybe we should make it red. Try adding your own style to this plot, because the best way to learn about plotting and about dealing with data is to actually do it. And so don't take what I've done here and just treat that as it's done. Arguably, it's not. I improve the look of the graph, but it's by no means complete, and I would certainly wouldn't present this to anybody. So take your pick. I if you like this, absolutely keep going. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Thank you, everybody, and I will see you then.